The pitchfork slipped from Catherine Hayes's blistered hands for the third time that morning, clattering against the stable floor and sending a scatter of soiled straw across her worn boots. She bent to retrieve it, her arms trembling with exhaustion, and tried not to think about how those same hands had once held champagne flutes and silk fans at her uncle's grand balls in Santa Fe. That world felt like something from another lifetime now, though barely 3 months had passed since everything had come crashing down around her. The September heat of 1883 pressed down on the small town of Silver Creek, New Mexico territory, making the air inside the livery stable thick and oppressive. Sweat traced paths through the dust on Catherine's face as she returned to her work, methodically moving through the stalls with the kind of determination that came from knowing this was the only thing standing between her and starvation. Mr. Hendricks, the livery owner, paid her in meals and a place to sleep in the tack room. It was not much, but it was survival. She had wrapped her mother's ring in a strip of cloth and tied it around her neck that first desperate week, unable to bear parting with the last piece of her former life. The emerald set in gold filigree had been a gift from her father to her mother on their wedding day, passed to Catherine on her 18th birthday just 2 years ago. Now at 20, Catherine found herself mucking out horse stalls in a dusty frontier town, hiding from the scandal that had destroyed everything she had ever known. The sound of boots on wooden planks made her look up. A man stood in the stable doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright morning sun. As he stepped inside, Catherine quickly lowered her gaze and returned to her work, hoping he would conduct his business and leave without paying her much attention. Most people did not look twice at the stable hand, and that was exactly how she wanted it. "Morning," the man said, his voice a low drawl that carried easily through the quiet stable. "I need to board my horse for a few days while I conduct some business in town." "Mr. Hendricks is up at the feed store," Catherine replied, keeping her eyes down as she moved to the next stall. "He should be back within the hour." "That is all right, I can wait." The man led his horse, a beautiful paint gelding, toward one of the empty stalls. "Been riding since before dawn. Reckon both of us could use some rest." Catherine nodded but said nothing, focusing intently on her work. She could feel him watching her as she worked, and it made her skin prickle with unease. She had gotten good at being invisible over these past months, blending into the background of this rough frontier town where no one asked questions about a young woman down on her luck. "You work here long?" the man asked, and Catherine could hear him moving around the stall, unsaddling his horse with practiced efficiency. "A few months," she answered shortly, hoping her tone would discourage further conversation. "Hard work for someone so slight." Catherine bristled at that, but kept her voice even. "I manage well enough." She heard him chuckle softly, not mockingly, but with something that sounded almost like respect. "I can see that. The stalls look cleaner than most liveries I have been in from here to Texas." Despite herself, Catherine felt a small flush of pride. She had always been thorough in everything she did, whether it was mastering a piano sonata or mucking out a stable. Her governess used to say that Catherine approached every task with the same fierce determination. That trait had not disappeared just because her circumstances had changed so drastically. The man emerged from the stall, and Catherine finally allowed herself a quick glance at him. He was perhaps 25, with sun-darkened skin and brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy, worn denim and a faded shirt. But something about the way he carried himself suggested intelligence and capability beyond simple ranch work. His eyes, she noticed, were an unusual shade of gray-green, and they studied her with an intensity that made her look away quickly. "Name is Jacob Reese," he said, extending a hand. Catherine hesitated, then realized refusing would draw more attention than accepting. She wiped her palm on her trousers and shook his hand briefly. "Catherine," she said, leaving off her surname as she had since arriving in Silver Creek. His hand was calloused and strong, but his grip was careful, as though he was aware of his own strength. As their hands met, Catherine felt something shift in the air between them, a spark of connection she had not expected and definitely did not want. She pulled her hand back quickly and returned to her work. "Just Catherine, Jacob asked, leaning against a support beam with his arms crossed. That is all that matters for mucking stalls, she replied, more sharply than she intended. She expected him to take offense, but he just smiled slightly. Fair enough. We all got our reasons for keeping things to ourselves out here. That made Catherine pause in her work. She glanced at him again, trying to read his meaning, but his expression was neutral. Before she could formulate a response, a piece of straw caught in the cloth around her neck, and she reached up automatically to brush it away. The movement dislodged the fabric slightly, and for just a moment, the gold chain and ring slipped into view. Jacob's eyes widened fractionally, and Catherine saw recognition flash across his face before she could tuck the ring back beneath her shirt. Her heart began to pound. That ring was distinctive, one of a kind, commissioned by her father from a jeweler in St. Louis. Anyone who had moved in territorial society circles would recognize it. That is quite a piece, Jacob said quietly, his tone suddenly careful. It was my mother's, Catherine said quickly, her voice tight. The only thing I have left of her. That was true enough. Her mother had died of fever when Catherine was 15, leaving her in the care of her father until his death last year. After that, she had gone to live with her uncle, Governor Marcus Hayes of New Mexico Territory, and his wife in Santa Fe. That arrangement had ended in disaster 3 months ago. Jacob nodded slowly, his eyes meeting hers with an expression she could not quite read. Must be precious to you, then. It is. He seemed about to say something else, but Mr. Hendricks chose that moment to return, bustling into the stable with his usual energy despite the heat. Jacob Reese, heard you were coming through town. Got business with the Anderson Ranch? That I do, Jacob confirmed, his attention shifting to the older man. Need to discuss some cattle purchases. As the two men talked business, Catherine retreated to the far end of the stable and lost herself in her work. But she could feel Jacob's gaze on her periodically throughout their conversation, and her stomach churned with anxiety. If he recognized the ring, if he knew who she really was, everything she had worked to build here, fragile as it was, could come crashing down. When the arrangements were finalized and Mr. Hendricks had left to attend to other business, Jacob lingered. Catherine kept her back to him, hoping he would simply leave, but instead she heard his footsteps approaching. Catherine, he said quietly, and something in his tone made her turn around despite her better judgment. He stood a few feet away, his expression serious but not unkind. I want you to know, whatever brought you here, whatever you are running from, your secret is safe with me. Catherine felt her throat tighten. I do not know what you mean. I think you do. He took a step closer, lowering his voice even though they were alone. I was at Governor Hayes's summer ball last year. I remember seeing that ring. I remember you wearing it. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. She wanted to deny it, to lie, but something about the gentle certainty in Jacob's eyes told her it would be pointless. Instead, she lifted her chin and met his gaze directly. Are you going to tell him where I am? No. The answer was immediate and definitive. Like I said, we all have our reasons. If you are here mucking stalls instead of living in the governor's mansion, I figure you have got good cause. Why would you help me? Catherine asked, suspicious, despite the relief flooding through her. You do not even know me. Jacob was quiet for a moment, studying her face with those unusual gray-green eyes. I knew your father, he said finally, James Hayes. He helped my family when no one else would. When I was 17, my father died and left us with nothing but debt. Your father was handling some legal work in our county, and he found a way to settle the debts that let my mother keep our small ranch. He did not have to do that. He could have just let the bank take everything like they wanted to, but he fought for us. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. That sounded exactly like her father. He had always believed in using his position as an attorney to help people, not just to accumulate wealth and influence like so many others in his profession. I did not know, she whispered. No reason you would have. It was 7 years ago, and I was just some kid from a struggling ranch family, but I never forgot what he did for us. So if his daughter needs help, needs someone to keep quiet about where she is, then that is what I'm going to do." Catherine felt something crack open inside her chest, some tight knot of fear and loneliness she had been carrying for months. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears, but a few escaped anyway. She wiped them away roughly with the back of her hand, leaving streaks in the dust on her face. "Thank you," she managed to say. "You cannot know what this means to me." Jacob reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted to, and gently touched her shoulder. The gesture was brief and respectful, but it held a warmth that Catherine had not felt since leaving Santa Fe. "You do not have to tell me anything you do not want to," he said, "but if you ever need help or just someone to talk to, I'm here for the next week at least." Then he turned and left, leaving Catherine standing in the middle of the stable with her pitchfork forgotten in her hands and her heart beating strangely in her chest. She had not expected kindness. She had not expected to be recognized. And she definitely had not expected the small flutter of something that felt almost like hope. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine work. Catherine fed and watered the horses, cleaned the remaining stalls, and helped Mr. Hendricks repair a section of fence out back. But her mind kept drifting back to Jacob Reese and his quiet promise to keep her secret. It had been so long since anyone had shown her genuine kindness without expecting something in return. The experience left her feeling off balance and uncertain. That evening, as the sun began to set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Catherine sat in the tack room that served as her bedroom and allowed herself to think about the past. She had been avoiding those memories for months, pushing them down every time they threatened to surface. But Jacob's kindness and his mention of her father had opened the floodgates. Her father had died suddenly of a heart condition just after Catherine turned 19. Grief-stricken and alone, she had gratefully accepted her uncle's invitation to come live with him and his wife in Santa Fe. At first, everything had been wonderful. Her uncle doted on her, introducing her to territorial society, taking her to balls and dinners and cultural events. Her aunt seemed pleased to have another woman in the house, but then her uncle's business partner, Richard Sterling, had started paying attention to Catherine. He was 45 years old, twice her age, and everything about him made her skin crawl. But he was wealthy and influential, and her uncle thought it would be an excellent match. When Catherine refused his advances, insisting she had no interest in marrying a man old enough to be her father, Sterling had become vengeful. He had started a rumor that Catherine had been conducting an inappropriate relationship with one of the household staff, a young man named Daniel who worked in the stables. It was completely false. Daniel was happily engaged to a girl in town, and Catherine had barely exchanged more than polite greetings with him. But Sterling had fabricated evidence, paid people to lie, and made the scandal seem real enough that society believed it. Her uncle, concerned primarily with his political reputation, had believed Sterling over his own niece, or perhaps he had simply found it convenient to believe, given Sterling's importance to his business ventures. Either way, he had given Catherine a choice: marry Sterling and let him restore her reputation, or leave his house with nothing. Catherine had left. She had taken only what she could carry, including her mother's ring, and fled Santa Fe in the middle of the night. She had enough money for stagecoach fare to Silver Creek, a small town far enough from Santa Fe that she hoped no one would recognize her. She had arrived with empty pockets and a desperate need for work, any work that would keep her fed and housed. Mr. Hendricks had been skeptical when she first asked about working at the livery, but he had been willing to give her a chance when she proved she was not afraid of hard work. For 3 months, she had kept her head down, worked herself to exhaustion, and tried not to think about the life she had lost. Now someone knew who she was. Catherine should have been terrified. She should have been planning to run again, to find another town, another identity. But something about Jacob made her want to trust him. Maybe it was what he had said about her father. Maybe it was the genuine warmth in his eyes. Or maybe she was just so tired of running, so tired of being alone, that she was willing to take the risk. She fell asleep that night with more peace than she had felt in months, though she could not have explained exactly why. The next morning, Catherine was surprised when Jacob appeared at the stable just after dawn. She was already working, having learned that starting early meant she could finish her heaviest chores before the worst of the day's heat set in. "You are up early," she observed, pausing in her work to push a strand of dark hair out of her face. "Ranching habits," Jacob replied with a slight smile. "Body does not know how to sleep past sunrise anymore." He glanced around the stable. "Hendricks here yet?" "No, he usually comes in around 7. "Good." Jacob picked up a spare pitchfork, leaning against the wall. "Then I can help you finish these stalls before he gets here." Catherine stared at him. "You want to help me muck stalls? You are paying to board your horse here, not work." "I know, but I also know this is hard work for one person, and I have got time before my meeting at the Anderson Ranch." He was already moving toward the next stall that needed cleaning. "Besides, I am used to it. Grew up doing this kind of work on my family's ranch." Catherine wanted to argue, but the truth was she could use the help. "Mister." Hendricks kept talking about hiring another hand, but so far it had not happened, and the work was exhausting. "All right," she said finally, "thank you." They worked in companionable silence for a while, falling into an easy rhythm. Jacob was efficient and thorough, clearly familiar with the work. Despite the early hour, conversation began to flow naturally between them as they worked. "So you have a ranch?" Catherine asked, hauling a wheelbarrow of soiled straw toward the pile out back. "Small one about 30 miles west of here. It is not much, but it is mine. Well, mine and my mother's, though she mostly stays in town these days. Her health is not what it used to be." "I'm sorry." "It is all right. She has got a good life. Friends, a comfortable house. The ranch keeps me busy enough for both of us." Jacob dumped another forkful of straw into the wheelbarrow. "I am actually looking to expand the herd, which is why I am here talking to Anderson. He has got some good breeding stock." "You must be doing well then if you're expanding." "Well enough. It has taken 7 years of hard work, but we are finally starting to see some profit beyond what we need just to survive." There was pride in his voice, the kind that came from knowing you had built something with your own hands. Catherine felt a pang of envy, not for the ranch itself, but for the sense of purpose and accomplishment Jacob clearly felt. She had been drifting for months, just surviving day to day without any real plan for the future. "What about you?" Jacob asked, his tone carefully casual. "What were you planning to do before everything changed?" Catherine paused in her work, considering how much to share. But something about the quiet morning and Jacob's steady presence made her want to talk. "I wanted to be a teacher," she admitted. "I love children and I love learning. My father used to say I would have made an excellent educator because I had patience and passion for knowledge." "Why did you not pursue it?" "Women teachers are scarce in the territory, and most schools prefer men. My father was trying to help me find a position when he died. After that, well, my uncle had different ideas about what I should do with my life." She did not elaborate, but Jacob seemed to understand. "You still could," he said. "Teach, I mean. Silver Creek does not have a proper school. Kids either learn at home or do not learn at all. I bet if you talk to some of the families in town, they would jump at the chance to have someone educated teach their children." Catherine had not thought of that. She had been so focused on just surviving that she had not considered trying to build something more. "I do not know. I do not have any books, any supplies." "Start small. 1 or 2 students may be meeting in someone's parlor or at the church. Word would spread if you are good, and I suspect you would be." Jacob looked at her with that same steady confidence that made her want to believe him. "You should not have to spend the rest of your life mucking stalls, Catherine. Not that there is anything wrong with honest work, but you have got skills and education that could help people. Why do you care?" The question came out more vulnerable than Catherine intended. "You barely know me." Jacob was quiet for a moment, leaning on his pitchfork as he considered his answer. "I guess because I know what it is like to feel stuck, like life has got you cornered and there is no way forward. After my father died, I felt like that for a long time, but your father showed me that sometimes people help just because it is the right thing to do, not because they want something in return. Maybe I'm trying to pay that forward. Catherine felt her throat tighten again. She was not used to this kind of goodness anymore. The past months had taught her to be suspicious, to assume everyone had ulterior motives, but Jacob seemed genuinely sincere. I will think about it, she said softly. Thank you. They finished the stalls just as Mr. Hendricks arrived, looking surprised to find the work already done. Jacob just smiled and said he had been unable to sleep and figured he might as well make himself useful. Hendricks seemed happy enough with that explanation and headed off to tend to his other business. Over the next few days, Jacob appeared at the stable every morning to help with the work. Catherine protested at first, insisting he did not need to spend his time this way, but he was persistent. And truthfully, she found herself looking forward to those early morning hours working alongside him. They talked about everything and nothing as they worked. Jacob told her about his ranch, about the challenges of making a living from the land, about his dreams of building something lasting. Catherine found herself sharing more about her own past, carefully editing around the most painful parts, but letting him see glimpses of who she had been before everything fell apart. She learned that Jacob was 24, that he loved to read whenever he could get his hands on books, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. She learned that he was unfailingly kind to the horses, that he noticed small details most people missed, that he had a way of listening that made her feel truly heard. And she began to realize with a mixture of excitement and terror that she was developing feelings for him. Real feelings, not the shallow infatuation of ballroom dances and polite courtship, but something deeper and more substantial. She caught herself watching him when he was not looking, memorizing the way he moved, the sound of his laugh, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. It was dangerous. Catherine knew that. She was supposed to be hiding, protecting herself, not opening her heart to someone, but Jacob made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her father died, and that was a powerful thing. On the fourth morning, as they finished their work and stood in the quiet stable watching dust motes drift through shafts of early sunlight, Jacob turned to her with an expression that made her heart skip. "Come to dinner with me tonight," he said. It was not really a question, but not quite a demand either. More of a hopeful invitation. Catherine hesitated. Going to dinner with Jacob would mean being seen together in public, would mean acknowledging whatever this thing was growing between them. It felt like a risk, but it also felt like something she desperately wanted. "Where?" she asked. "There's a little restaurant on the edge of town, place called Maria's. The food is excellent and it is quiet. We could talk without half the town watching." Catherine knew she should say no. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to keep her distance, but she was tired of being smart and safe. She was tired of being alone. "All right," she said. Yes, I would like that." The smile that broke across Jacob's face was worth any risk. That evening, Catherine used some of her carefully hoarded coins to buy a wash and use of a bathtub at the boarding house down the street. She scrubbed away the stable smell and dressed in the one decent dress she still owned, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days but was at least clean and relatively unwrinkled. She unpinned her mother's ring from its hiding place and slipped it onto her finger for the first time in months. Looking at it there, catching the lamplight, she felt her mother's presence like a gentle encouragement. Jacob was waiting outside the livery stable, and the look on his face when he saw her made Catherine's cheeks flush. He had cleaned up too, wearing a pressed shirt and vest, his hair still damp from washing. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and Catherine believed he meant it. They walked to Maria's as the sun set, painting the desert sky in brilliant colors. The restaurant was small and cozy, run by a Mexican woman named Maria Rodriguez, who greeted them warmly and led them to a quiet table in the back corner. The food, as Jacob had promised, was excellent. Enchiladas with rich sauce, fresh tortillas, beans seasoned perfectly with spices Catherine had learned to appreciate since coming to the territory. But more than the food, Catherine savored the conversation. Away from the stable and the constraints of their usual morning work sessions, they talked more freely. Jacob told her about growing up on the ranch, about the loneliness of the past few years as he worked to build something stable, about his dreams for the future. "I want to have a family someday," he admitted, his gray-green eyes meeting hers across the table. "I want kids running around the ranch, teaching them about the land and the animals. I want to build something that lasts beyond just my own lifetime." "That sounds wonderful," Catherine said softly. She had always wanted children too, had imagined teaching them music and literature, watching them grow and discover the world. Those dreams had felt impossibly distant these past months. "What about you?" Jacob asked. "What do you want, Catherine? Not what your uncle wanted for you or what you think you're supposed to want, but what you really want." No one had asked her that in so long. Catherine took a moment to really consider the question. "I want to matter," she said finally. "I want to do something meaningful with my life, help people in some real way. I want to wake up in the morning knowing that my day has purpose beyond just surviving, and I want to be loved for who I really am, not for my family connections or what I can bring to some political alliance." "You already matter," Jacob said quietly, "and anyone who cannot see that is a fool." The intensity in his voice made Catherine's breath catch. There was something shifting between them, something moving from friendship into deeper territory. She could feel it like an electrical charge in the air. "Jacob," she started, not sure what she was going to say. "I know this is fast," he interrupted gently. "I know we have only known each other a few days, but Catherine, I need you to know that I have not felt this way about anyone in years, maybe ever. There is something about you, the way you face challenges, the way you keep going even when everything has fallen apart. You are strong and smart and kind, and I find myself thinking about you every moment I am not with you." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, overwhelmed tears. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, trying to be practical and careful, but I feel it too." Jacob reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing gently over her mother's ring. "Then let us see where this goes. No promises, no pressure. Just two people getting to know each other and seeing what happens." "All right," Catherine agreed, her heart feeling lighter than it had in months. "Yes." They left the restaurant holding hands, and Jacob walked her back to the livery stable through the quiet evening streets. At the door to the tack room where she slept, he paused and looked down at her with such tenderness that it made her ache. "Can I see you tomorrow?" he asked. "I would be disappointed if you did not," Catherine replied with a small smile. Jacob grinned, and then, moving slowly to give her time to pull away if she wanted to, he leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. It was chaste and respectful, but it sent warmth flooding through Catherine's entire body. "Good night, Catherine." "Good night, Jacob." She watched him walk away into the darkness and then slipped into her small room, touching her forehead where his lips had been. For the first time since fleeing Santa Fe, Catherine felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right. The next few days passed in a blur of happiness Catherine had not thought possible. Jacob continued to help her with the morning stable work, but now their interactions were colored with a new awareness, a new intimacy. He would brush against her shoulder as they worked side by side, and she would feel electricity shoot through her body. She would catch him watching her and smile, and his returning smile would be full of affection and something deeper. They had dinner together every evening, sometimes at Maria's, sometimes just sitting on the fence behind the stable and sharing food Catherine had purchased from the general store. They talked about everything, learning each other's stories, dreams, fears, and hopes. Jacob told her about the loneliness of ranching alone, about the weight of responsibility he felt toward his mother, about his fear that he would never find someone who understood the life he wanted to build. Catherine shared more about her past, telling him the full story of what had happened in Santa Fe. Jacob listened without judgment, his expression growing darker as she described Richard Sterling's cruel revenge and her uncle's betrayal. "He should be horsewhipped," Jacob said when she finished, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Both of them. What they did to you was unconscionable." "It does not matter now," Catherine said, though hearing Jacob's anger on her behalf was strangely comforting. "I am here, and I'm building a new life." "It does matter. You lost everything because of their lies and cruelty. That is not something to just brush aside." Jacob took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "But you are right that the important thing is moving forward, and I want to be part of that forward, Catherine. I want to help you build something new." "You already have," she said softly, "more than you know." On Jacob's 6th day in Silver Creek, he completed his business with the Anderson Ranch and arranged to return home the following morning. The news hit Catherine harder than she expected. She had known he would have to leave eventually, that his ranch and his responsibilities would call him back, but the thought of not seeing him every morning, of losing this connection they had built, filled her with unexpected grief. "Come with me," Jacob said that evening, as they sat on their usual fence, watching the sunset in brilliant orange and purple streaks across the desert sky. Catherine's heart lurched. "What?" "Come back to the ranch with me. Not as anything you are not ready for," he added quickly. "But Catherine, I cannot stand the thought of leaving you here. You deserve better than mucking stalls for the rest of your life. Come to the ranch. You could teach the local children like we talked about. There are at least a dozen families within riding distance who would pay for their kids to have proper schooling. You could live in town near my mother, or we could build you a small house on the ranch property, whatever makes you comfortable." "Jacob, I cannot just leave. I have obligations here to Mr. Hendricks." "Hendricks will understand. I will make sure he gets compensated for any inconvenience." "Catherine, please. I am falling in love with you. I think I have been falling in love with you since that first morning when you looked at me with such fierce determination despite being exhausted. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a week. But I cannot pretend these feelings do not exist. And I hope, you feel something similar." Catherine felt tears streaming down her face. "I do. God help me, I do." "But Jacob, what if your mother does not approve of me? What if people find out about the scandal? I do not want to ruin your reputation or hurt your business." "My mother will love you because I love you. As for the scandal, anyone who bothers to look into it will see it was fabricated nonsense. Your character speaks for itself, Catherine. You have been working yourself to exhaustion doing honest labor rather than take the easy road Sterling offered. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." "This is crazy," Catherine whispered, but she was smiling through her tears. "Maybe, but sometimes crazy is exactly right." Jacob cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "Say yes, Catherine. Take a chance on this, on us. I promise I will spend every day trying to make you happy." Catherine thought about her small tack room, about the endless days of backbreaking work, about the loneliness that had been her constant companion for months. Then she thought about Jacob's steady presence, his kindness, the way he made her laugh and challenged her to dream again. She thought about teaching children, about having purpose beyond mere survival, about building a life with someone who saw her for who she truly was. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I will come with you." Jacob's face lit up with pure joy. And then he was kissing her, really kissing her, and Catherine felt like she was flying. His lips were warm and gentle but insistent, and she kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the past week, the past months, the past year. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. "We're going to have a good life," Jacob promised. "I swear to you." "I believe you," Catherine said, and she meant it. The next morning, Catherine gave Mr. Hendricks her notice. He was disappointed but understanding, especially when Jacob offered him a generous sum to compensate for the sudden departure and to help hire a replacement. Catherine packed her few belongings, carefully wrapping her mother's ring in cloth once more, though she no longer felt the need to hide it. They left Silver Creek mid-morning, riding side by side on Jacob's horse with Catherine's small bundle of possessions tied behind the saddle. As the town disappeared behind them and the open landscape stretched out ahead, Catherine felt something she had not felt in a very long time: hope for the future. The ride to Jacob's ranch took most of the day. They stopped periodically to rest the horse and stretch their legs, and Jacob pointed out landmarks and told her about the area. The land was beautiful in its harsh way, all red rock and scrub brush and endless sky. It was so different from the manicured gardens and cultivated landscapes of Santa Fe, but Catherine found herself drawn to its raw honesty. They reached the ranch just as the sun was beginning to set. It was modest but well-maintained, with a sturdy house, a barn, corrals, and various outbuildings. Catherine could see the care that had gone into maintaining the property, the pride Jacob took in his work evident in every detail. "It is not much," Jacob said, suddenly sounding uncertain, "but it is home." "It is perfect," Catherine said honestly. She could imagine children playing in the yard, horses grazing in the fields, a life full of purpose and love. "It is absolutely perfect." Jacob helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering on her waist. "I should take you to meet my mother. She has got a house in town about 2 miles that direction. You can stay with her tonight, and tomorrow we can start figuring out the teaching arrangements and where you want to live." "Jacob." Catherine caught his hand before he could step away. "I do not want to wait. I do not want careful and proper and slow. I have spent the past year being careful, and it brought me nothing but misery. I want to be with you, really be with you." Jacob searched her face, his expression serious. "Catherine, I do not want you to feel rushed or pressured. We have time." "I know, but I also know what I want. Do you want me?" "More than anything," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Then ask me? Ask me properly?" Understanding dawned in Jacob's eyes. He took both her hands in his and looked at her with such love that it took her breath away. "Catherine Hayes, will you marry me? Will you be my wife? Build a life with me, raise a family with me? I promise to love you, respect you, support your dreams, and keep you safe for the rest of my days." "Yes," Catherine said, tears streaming down her face again. "Yes, absolutely, yes." They married 3 days later in a small church with only Jacob's mother and a few close friends as witnesses. Jacob's mother, Sarah Reese, had welcomed Catherine with open arms, declaring that any woman who could capture her son's heart so completely must be someone special. She was a warm, intelligent woman in her early 50s, and Catherine could see where Jacob had gotten his kindness and steady strength. The ceremony was simple, but beautiful. Catherine wore a new dress that Sarah had helped her purchase, cream-colored, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Jacob wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Catherine's heart skipped when she saw him waiting at the altar. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Jacob kissed her, Catherine felt like she was finally home after a long and difficult journey. Everything she had lost, everything she had suffered seemed to lead to this moment, to this man, to this new beginning. They returned to the ranch that evening as husband and wife, and Jacob carried her over the threshold of the house with such tenderness that Catherine felt tears prick her eyes again. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, full of whispered promises and soft touches, and Catherine finally understood what it meant to be truly loved. In the weeks that followed, Catherine threw herself into building their life together. She cleaned and organized the ranch house, adding small touches that made it feel more like a home. She planted a vegetable garden near the kitchen, remembering skills her mother had taught her years ago, and she started spreading word that she was available to tutor children in reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and literature. The response was overwhelming. Within a month, Catherine had 10 students of varying ages meeting at the small church in town 3 days a week. The families paid what they could, some in cash, some in goods like eggs or vegetables or help with ranch work. It was not about the money for Catherine. It was about the joy of teaching, of seeing children's faces light up when they mastered a new concept, of feeling like she was contributing something meaningful to her community. Jacob supported her endeavors completely, often riding into town with her on teaching days and helping with setup. He would sit in the back of the church and watch her teach with such pride and love in his eyes that it made Catherine's heart swell. Their first winter together was harsh, with snow and bitter cold that kept them close to the house for weeks at a time, but Catherine found she did not mind. She spent those long winter evenings reading aloud to Jacob from books they borrowed from Sarah, or working on lessons for her students, or simply sitting by the fire and talking about their dreams for the future. Spring brought new life to the ranch and new hope to Catherine's heart when she realized she was pregnant. She told Jacob one evening in April as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the same way they had that first evening when he asked her to come to the ranch with him. "We are going to have a baby," she said simply, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. Jacob's eyes widened, then filled with tears. "Truly?" "Truly. In early November, if I have calculated correctly." Jacob pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. "I love you so much," he whispered. "I cannot believe how lucky I am." "We both are," Catherine said, holding him just as tightly. "We both are." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Catherine's teaching had to slow down as she grew larger and more uncomfortable in the summer heat. Sarah proved invaluable, coming to stay at the ranch for the last month to help prepare for the baby's arrival, and to fuss over Catherine in a way that was both exasperating and comforting. Their son was born on a cool November evening, coming into the world with a healthy cry that made both his parents weep with joy. They named him James, after Catherine's father, and he was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, a shock of dark hair, and gray-green eyes that reminded Catherine so much of Jacob that her heart ached with love. Jacob was a devoted father from the first moment, constantly holding James, talking to him, showing him around the ranch even though he was far too young to understand. Watching her husband with their son, Catherine felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. When James was 3 months old, Catherine received a letter forwarded from Silver Creek. It was from her uncle's wife, her Aunt Margaret. Catherine almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of her. The letter was brief but shocking. Richard Sterling had been arrested for fraud and embezzlement. During the investigation, evidence had come to light about his campaign to ruin Catherine's reputation, including testimony from people he had bribed to lie. The scandal had destroyed Sterling's standing in society and tarnished her uncle's reputation as well. Margaret wrote that her uncle deeply regretted his treatment of Catherine and wanted to make amends if Catherine would allow it. Catherine showed the letter to Jacob that evening. He read it carefully, then looked at her with concern. "What do you want to do?" Catherine thought about it for a long time. Part of her wanted to ignore the letter, to let her uncle live with the consequences of his choices. But another part, the part that remembered the man who had comforted her after her father's death, who had once been kind before greed and politics corrupted him, felt a stirring of compassion. "I want to write back," she said finally. "Not to reconcile exactly. I cannot forgive what he did that easily, but I want him to know that I am well, that I am happy, that I found a good life despite everything. Maybe someday we can rebuild some kind of relationship, but not yet, not for a while." "That seems fair," Jacob said, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head. "You have a generous heart, Catherine Reese." Catherine wrote a brief letter explaining that she was married, happy, and had a son. She did not give her exact location, but she did say that she was teaching children and living a fulfilling life. She told her uncle that perhaps in time they could correspond more. But for now, this was all she could offer. It felt like closing a chapter while leaving the door open just a crack for the future. The years that followed were full and rich. Catherine's teaching practice grew until she had 20 regular students and had to hold classes 4 days a week. The community built a proper schoolhouse, and Catherine was named the official teacher with a real salary. It was modest, but it was hers, earned through her own skills and hard work. James grew into a bright, curious toddler who followed his father everywhere and asked endless questions. When he was 2, Catherine became pregnant again, this time with twins. She was simultaneously thrilled and terrified. Jacob just laughed and said the house would be full of noise and life, exactly as he had always dreamed. The twins, girls they named Emma and Rose, arrived in the spring of James's 3rd year. They were identical and beautiful, with Jacob's eyes and Catherine's dark hair. The ranch house rang with the sounds of children laughing, crying, playing, and learning. It was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely wonderful. Sarah became an indispensable part of their lives, spending more time at the ranch than in town, helping with the children and running the household when Catherine was teaching. The older woman bloomed in her role as grandmother, and Catherine felt blessed to have her as family. When James was 5 and the twins were 2, Catherine resumed regular correspondence with her aunt and, more cautiously, with her uncle. She learned that her uncle had retired from politics and was working to make amends for many of his past choices. They would never have the relationship they once did, but Catherine found she could forgive, if not forget. The anger and hurt that had once consumed her had faded, replaced by contentment in the life she had built. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Jacob took Catherine back to the fence behind the ranch house where they used to sit and talk during those early days. The sun was setting in its familiar brilliant display, painting the desert landscape in golds and purples. "Do you remember when I asked you to come to the ranch with me?" Jacob asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Of course. I thought you were crazy." "Maybe I was, but it was the best kind of crazy." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Catherine, these past 5 years have been the happiest of my life. You have given me everything I dreamed of and so much more. You have made me a better man." "You were always a good man," Catherine said softly. "You saw me when I was at my lowest, and you did not judge. You offered me kindness when I expected nothing. You gave me a reason to hope again." "I love you," Jacob said simply. "I loved you when you were mucking stalls with blistered hands and determination in your eyes. I loved you when you said yes to marrying me after knowing me barely a week. I love you now as my wife, the mother of my children, my partner in everything, and I will love you every day for the rest of my life." Catherine felt the familiar prick of tears, but they were happy tears. "I love you too, more than I could ever put into words." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, and Catherine reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had brought her here. She had lost everything she thought mattered, only to discover what truly did. She had fled in disgrace and found redemption. She had hidden her identity and found someone who loved her for exactly who she was. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. The ranch prospered as Jacob's careful management and hard work paid off. The school grew until Catherine needed an assistant teacher, and she took deep satisfaction in training the young woman who joined her. Their children grew strong and healthy, James becoming his father's shadow on the ranch, while the twins showed early signs of inheriting their mother's love of learning. When James was 10, Emma and Rose were 7, and Catherine was pregnant with their 4th child. Her uncle wrote to ask if he and Margaret could visit. After much discussion, Catherine agreed. The visit was awkward at first, her uncle clearly uncomfortable with his own past actions, but it became easier as he met his great-nieces and great-nephew and saw the life Catherine had built. On the last evening of their visit, her uncle took Catherine aside. "I failed you," he said simply. "I chose politics and money over family, and I have regretted it every day since. I do not expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I am proud of you. Proud of how you survived, how you built this life, how you became this remarkable woman. Your father would be proud too." "Thank you," Catherine said, and she meant it. The words did not erase the past, but they helped heal some of the old wounds. "I think we are going to be all right, Uncle Marcus. Not the way we were before, but all right." Their 4th child, another son they named Thomas, was born in December. He was loud and demanding from the first moment, making his presence known in a way that had everyone laughing. Jacob joked that the house was going to burst at the seams if they had any more children. Catherine just smiled and said she would be happy whatever came. The years settled into a comfortable rhythm of ranching and teaching, of raising children and being part of a community. Catherine's scandal in Santa Fe became just a distant memory, irrelevant to the life she had built. When people asked about her past, she told them the truth. She was the daughter of an attorney, the niece of a former governor, and the woman who had found her true home mucking out stalls in a dusty livery stable. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob gave Catherine a gift that made her cry. It was a leather-bound book, and inside he had written the story of how they met, how he had recognized her ring and kept her secret, how they had fallen in love in the space of a week. He had written it all down so their children and grandchildren would know the story. "I never want to forget," he wrote in the dedication, "how lucky I was that day you dropped your pitchfork and looked at me with such fierce determination. You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even covered in dust and exhaustion. And you still are." Catherine read the whole thing that night after the children were asleep, crying and laughing in equal measure as Jacob's words brought back every detail of those early days. When she finished, she looked at her husband, who was watching her with that same steady love he had shown from the beginning. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for seeing me, for keeping my secret, for giving me a reason to believe in love again." "Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy," Jacob replied, pulling her close, "for saying yes when you should have probably run in the opposite direction. Best decision I ever made." As the years passed, Catherine and Jacob watched their children grow into capable, kind adults. James took over more of the ranch operations, showing the same dedication his father had. The twins both became teachers, inspired by their mother's passion for education. Thomas followed his own path, becoming a veterinarian and serving the ranching communities throughout the territory. Catherine continued teaching well into her 50s, touching the lives of hundreds of children over the decades. She became known throughout the region as a dedicated educator, and several of her former students went on to become teachers themselves, spreading her influence even further. Jacob and Catherine grew old together on the ranch, watching the landscape change, as New Mexico moved from territory to statehood in 1912, as the wild frontier gradually became settled communities, but their love remained constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. On the evening of their 40th anniversary, they sat once again on that fence behind the house, though they moved more slowly now and needed each other's help to climb up. The sunset was as spectacular as ever, the desert sky ablaze with color. 40 years, Jacob marveled, his arm around Catherine's shoulders. Seems impossible that it has been so long. "And yet it feels like yesterday that you walked into that stable and recognized my ring," Catherine replied, leaning into his warmth. "Sometimes I still cannot believe how lucky we got." "Not luck," Jacob said firmly. "Providence. You were exactly where you needed to be when you needed to be there, so we could find each other." Catherine looked at the ring on her finger, worn now from decades of wear, but still beautiful. She thought about her mother, about her father, about all the pain and loss that had brought her to that dusty livery stable in Silver Creek. And she thought about everything that had come after, all the joy and love and purpose she had found. "You're right," she said softly. "Not luck. Grace." They sat together until the stars came out, talking about their children and grandchildren, about the students Catherine had taught and the cattle Jacob had raised, about the life they had built from nothing but hope and determination and love. When they finally climbed down from the fence and walked back to the house hand in hand, they did so with the deep contentment of two people who had found exactly what they were meant to find. The house was full that night. 3 generations gathered to celebrate the anniversary. James and his wife were there with their 4 children. Emma and her husband brought their 2 daughters. Rose and her husband had 3 sons. Thomas arrived with his new bride, married only 6 months. Sarah Reese, now in her 90s but still sharp as ever, held court from her favorite chair, telling stories about Jacob as a boy that made everyone laugh. Catherine looked around the crowded, noisy, love-filled house, and felt her heart swell almost to bursting. This was what she had wanted all those years ago when Jacob had asked what she truly desired: to matter, to have purpose, to be loved for who she really was. She had found all that and so much more. Later, as she and Jacob prepared for bed, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. Her hair was gray now, her face lined with years of laughter and worry in equal measure. She barely resembled the desperate young woman who had hidden in that tack room, terrified and alone. "What are you thinking?" Jacob asked, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I'm thinking about how different I look from the girl you met in that stable, how different everything is." "You are more beautiful now than you were then," Jacob said, and Catherine could tell he meant it. "Because now I see everything you are, everything we have built, everything we have survived together. That young woman was lovely, but this woman, my wife, the mother of my children, the love of my life, she is extraordinary." Catherine turned in his arms and kissed him, putting 40 years of love and gratitude into the gesture. "We did it," she whispered. "We built something that lasts." "We did," Jacob agreed, "and I would do it all again every moment just to end up right here with you." They lay down together in the bed they had shared for 40 years, and Catherine fell asleep to the sound of her husband's steady breathing and the gentle murmur of family voices from other parts of the house. She dreamed of a dusty stable and a young cowboy with kind eyes, of a ring that held her mother's love, of all the moments that had led her home. Catherine lived to see the birth of her first great-grandchild, a girl named Sarah Catherine, after both her grandmothers. She held the tiny baby in her arms and thought about the circle of life, about how love and family continued beyond any one person's story. She thought about her mother and father, about how proud they would have been of the life she had built, the family she had created. Jacob remained her steady companion through all of it, their love deepening with each passing year rather than fading. They celebrated 50 years of marriage, surrounded by nearly 60 family members, all descended from that chance meeting in a dusty stable in Silver Creek. "I have been thinking," Jacob said one evening as they sat on their porch, watching yet another spectacular sunset, "about what I would tell that young man if I could go back in time to when I first walked into that stable." "What would you tell him?" Catherine asked. "I would tell him that the woman with the pitchfork and the desperate eyes is going to change his life in ways he cannot imagine. That keeping her secret will be the most important decision he ever makes. That falling in love with her will be easy, but that building a life together will take work and patience and faith, and it will all be worth it. Every moment of it." "I would tell that scared girl the same thing," Catherine said, "that the cowboy who recognizes her ring is going to save her in every way a person can be saved. That saying yes to him will be the beginning of everything good in her life." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the day fade into night. The ranch spread out before them, generations of work and love made manifest in barns and fences and the distant sound of cattle. The lights in the windows showed where their children lived on parcels of the ranch, raising the next generation. It was everything they had dreamed of and more. Catherine Hayes Reese passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, with Jacob holding her hand. She had lived a full and extraordinary life, touching hundreds of students and raising a family that would carry her values forward for generations. She had survived scandal and loss, had found strength she did not know she possessed, and had built something beautiful from the ashes of her old life. Jacob followed her 3 years later, his heart simply giving out one morning as he worked in the barn he had built 50 years earlier. His last words were Catherine's name, and those who found him said he died with a smile on his face, as though seeing something beautiful. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their headstones simple but meaningful: Jacob and Catherine Reese. Together they built a life of love, purpose, and family, forever united. Next to Catherine's name was a small engraving of a ring with an emerald, a reminder of the secret that had brought them together. Their children made sure the story was never forgotten. The leather-bound book Jacob had written became a treasured family heirloom, passed down through generations. The schoolhouse where Catherine taught was renamed in her honor, ensuring that her dedication to education would be remembered long after she was gone. And sometimes on quiet evenings, when the sunset painted the desert sky in brilliant colors, people swore they could see two figures sitting on the fence behind the old Reese Ranch house, leaning into each other and watching the day fade into night, together for all eternity, just as they had been in life. The cowboy who had recognized a ring and kept a secret, and the governor's niece who had been mucking stalls for food, forever bound by love that had begun in the most unlikely of places and had grown into something that would last long beyond their years on earth.